This is the geopolitical area called South Africa around 1860. It actually looked like this with Cape Town and mostly Eastern Cape, to a lesser extent the Northern Cape. But then we had Natal also governed by Britain, and then the Orange River Colony, Free State governed by the Afrikaners, and also the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republic, Transvaal governed by the Afrikaners. So what happened after this conference? There's a direct bearing on the formation of the ANC. That's the reason why we want to spend the bulk of our attention on what transpired after 1860. The socio-economic political situation which led to the formation of the ANC. Important things that happened in this area called South Africa, pictured around 1860. What are the things that were happening and how did the ANC emerge out of those things around 1860? That's what we want to focus basically on. Because most of the time when we talk about the formation of the ANC, there's this proclivity of focusing on 1912. You know, once you focus on 1912, if you engage outside there and you are restricted to 1912, you must know that you give information to the people, the comrades who might engage you. But as soon as you go back, you give them knowledge about the formation of the ANC. Because those things that happened there, the very important things, happened at a direct bearing on the formation of the ANC. Before, around 1860, tribes, the different tribes that were, their focus was exclusive on what is basically happening in their tribal area. And we want to make the assertion that the ANC is the first institution which resembled national consciousness among the natives of present-day South Africa. To juxtapose it, we can also say the ANC is the first organization that made people of different tribes to think not only as Xhosa, Sotho, Tswana, Pedi, but to think of themselves as these people with a common destiny. But what led to that kind of national consciousness? This is what we want to focus on. And the first thing that you start to think about that led to that kind of national consciousness is the emergence of the working class. Working class. Now, I'm sure the question will be asked, who is this working class? Here we refer to people who came from different parts of present-day South Africa. People who came from the north, people who came from KwaZulu, from different parts, from the Cape, and then they moved to common centers where they stayed, experienced the life the same way there, the hardships, no water, no sanitation, and as soon as they experience that, they start to realize that the challenges that they experience has nothing to do with a particular tribe, but it has everything to do with them uniting across tribal or ethnic origins. So here we have the emergence of that working class. And we are making the point that around 1820, 1810, we had people who moved to common centers. We had people who moved to Cape Town, working there in the docks, but we also had people who worked in the Cape on road construction. But around 1867, we had the discovery of diamonds in Kimberley, which pulled many people, or which had a major impact in pulling people from different tribes, different races, to common centers. For instance, in Kimberley. That is the discovery of minerals. So around 1867, diamonds were discovered in Kimberley. And then At the same time, a few years after 1867, we had the discovery of gold in the reef area around 1886. We had the discovery of gold in the reef. The impact of those comments, as I said earlier, it attracted people from all tribes throughout South Africa, even beyond the boundaries of South Africa, to common centers, to Kimberley, to the reef. People stayed, they experienced life the same, experienced the hardship the same, and then they decided now to, form what is called, common national consciousness, say that these are the challenges that we need to address, irrespective of our tribal origins. So that's it. As soon as the gold and diamonds were discovered from this, as soon as the mine is open, you need more labor to go and work. But the problem that we experienced during that period was that blacks were living self-sustainable lives on their lands in the Eastern Cape, in the Transvaal, in Natal, and there was no need for them to rush to the mines because they could sustain themselves through their land. And whites who were involved in the discovery of these minerals, they did not have the necessary numbers. The necessary numbers now to do the hard work of excavation, they needed blacks. So at the same time, what happened? The wars of conquest were now, remember when they arrived, they embarked on wars of conquest. Around that period when minerals were discovered, they accelerated the wars of conquest. Because blacks were now reluctant, because they were still staying on their lands, they were reluctant to go to the mines. So the wars of conquest were now accelerated. And the purpose of that was basically to force the blacks. And you see on a global scale, when major African kingdoms and chiefdoms were defeated, was two major battles, for instance, took place around 1879, when Sekhukhune was actually defeated. Sekhukhune of the Paris. And at the same time, we had another battle also in KZN, the Battle of Isandlwana. The Battle of Isandlwana. Here, Pretoria was defeated. First, Sekhukhune around 1879, early 1879 around March. Later that year, the Battle of Isandlwana, where Pretoria, the king of the Zulus, were now defeated. And what happened immediately when they were defeated, all kinds of taxes were now imposed on them. Because remember, blacks were there. The purpose, the rationale for the war was to push them to the mines to go and do the hard work of excavation or excavating the minerals there. So as soon as they were defeated, all sorts of taxes were now imposed on them. We had dog tax that was imposed, we had hard tax, we had poll tax that was imposed on them. But if you were a significant puller there in the countryside, meaning that if you had enough cattle, you could pay with cattle, say that here's the gold. But around 1888, cash was not demanded. Especially around 1894, when the Clan Trade Act was passed. Around 1894, the Clan Trade Act was passed. What this act says is that you can no longer pay with a goat or with a cattle here. What you need to do, cash was not demanded. And where do you get cash? The only place to get cash is at the mines. This basically forced so many people off their land to go and work in the mines. Because if you don't pay through with money, you'd be in trouble. The colonizers will come, they'll destroy your art, they'll take your animals, and you'll be left with nothing. So you are basically forced to go to the mines to go and work. But then, as soon as these people from the different tribes arrive in the mines, they then experience life the same way. They experience life, hardships the same, and that called for solidarity beyond ethnic and racial lines. That's how this national consciousness started. Remember, we said that the ANC was the only vehicle around 1912 that represented or resembled national consciousness. And we made the point that in the past, different tribes used to fight us, Musutu, Muzulu. Here you can already see people finding themselves in the mines, subjected to hardships, and it calls upon them now to reach out to other tribes. So this created this solidarity and national consciousness that is not restricted to tribal lines. Because the hardships were not actually meant for a particular tribe. So this is one of the factors which has a direct bearing. You will see in 1912 when Pixley spoke, he basically referred to this. When he made the call to say that now we must unite, basically referred to what transpired here. But then, the second factor which contributed immensely to the formation of the ANC is early Christian converts. You must forgive my spelling. Early Christian converts. I'm sure all of us remember the assertion made by Tutu at one point when he said that when the colonizers arrived on our shores, we had the land and they had the Bible. They said, let's pray. When we opened our eyes, we had the Bible and they had the land. It's what transpired during the 80s, late in, or rather early. And to make the point, comrades, for colonialism to succeed, what you need to do, you need to dominate and control the people who were defeated. You need to dominate and control those who are defeated. Dominate and control. You must actually change their way of life and their culture to make it easy for you to control and dominate them. And in our case, Christianity was actually introduced. Christianity was introduced to ensure that it's easier for the colonizers to control us. And the imposition of Christianity on African chiefdom and kingdoms had two impacts. It had negative impacts. The impact of that introduction of Christianity and negative in the sense that it led to deculturalization of African tribes, of African chiefs and kingdoms. It led to the deculturalization. But also, these colonizers, or those who were converted, were also responsible for the early wars of conquest. And a typical case in point is what transpired around the Pedi Kingdom. As soon as they were converted, many of them were the son of Squati, called Johannes Ngxanga, the brother of Sekhukhune, decided now to take and left with a sizable portion of the subjects of Sekhukhune, weakening the kingdom in that way, and they became vulnerable to attacks. That's how Sekhukhune was defeated in the Pedi War of 1876. Johannes Ngxanga left, weakening the kingdom in that way. as soon as Christianity was actually established, communists, you would have realized major mission stations were established. I know here in John Taulo Heights we have the Moffat mission station. But I don't know here in Kimberley, but in other areas, in Warrington there's a mission station. We had big mission stations where many of these converts decided actually to go and live and spend their time in living chiefdoms and kingdoms in that sense, weakening them and accelerating this process of conquest of chiefdoms. But then the positive about this imposition of Christianity, those who were staying in these areas, first and foremost, they realized as soon as they left that and lived in these mission stations, that they were no longer allowed to practice their cultures. You could not make Nkomboti there, or else you'd be in trouble. Nkomboti was associated with, Satan and negative things. You could no longer even pay lobola in that setup, because it was forbidden. But also the discrimination that prevailed in these areas. If you convert, you were accepted to rise in the ranks in church up until the deacon. You could not be fundis there. So, and those who were living there, remember we can easily call them the embryo of the African intelligence, because they got exposed to education, the converts, in this church setup. The first people who were exposed to education among the Africans or the natives are those who converted to Christianity. They lived in these mission stations, experienced these injustices and inequality that prevailed in these stations. They are not happy about that, and as a result, the rebellion started within the church. The rebellion started within the church because it's learned. They could see a grievance and they could articulate because of the education that they acquired over a period of time. That's the reason, comrades, you would see many of them then decided, because the gospel, they read the Bible, and the Bible says that we must live as equals, brothers and sisters in this setup, and we are subjected to inequality, to injustices. Some of them then decided that we are moving away from mission station. We appreciate the word that was brought to us, but we'll go and establish our own churches. So the rebellion started within the church. And it's important to have this understanding, comrades. Because it will tell you why does the ANC have the makeup of that there's currently of so many Christians and pastors that lead the organization. So the first person that went out of the mission station to go and establish his own church is called Ngxanga. And he established the Temple Church. The Temple Church around 1853. This is the first separate, the church that broke away from white churches. And they broke away basically from the Methodists. Do we have Methodists? Oh yeah, there's Eunice. And also in officials there's a Methodist, but I don't want to divulge now, else Monday I will be in trouble. So I'm avoiding I'm from. So the first person who established a black church in the geopolitical situation called South Africa is Ngxanga, obviously followed by Ngxanga Mukolo. There's a big church that is established. Only 2 peace members can belong to this church. You can't have men. Ngxanga Mukolo. Yeah. But he established the church around 1892. Only 2 people belong to that church. So Ngxanga Mukolo established that church around 1892. But then we had other separatists also, people who decided to move out of those traditional churches. For instance, we had P.J. Zimo, who moved away from, also from Methodist, and established the Presbyterian Church of Africa. There are two Presbyterians. You have the Scotland one, but then you have PJ Zimbo, who decided to establish the Presbyterian of Africa. So it's also separate, it's a black church. But then you have AME. Yes, AME comes from Ethiopia, the Ethiopian church. We had somebody called Reverend Dwayne, who was sent to America because Charlotte Mataike was there, and then he had the interaction with Mangena Mukoni. So Charlotte Dwayne was then seconded by Mukoni to say, we want to affiliate to this church, go there. But then he decided to bring the church back and ultimately ended up moving away from the Ethiopian church. Reverend Dwayne and Dwayne is a founder member of the ANC. He was also at the 1912 Bloemfontein Conference. He's a founder member of the ANC. So the point that we want to make is we then had these separatist churches as a result of the unhappiness that those who were living in mission stations were subjected to. And we said that they were educated Africans because of the education that was offered in these churches. They became unhappy. They saw the grievance and they could articulate. These were the ones who then decided later that no, we can't take the situation yet. We are moving out and establish our own independent churches. But then the third aspect that a direct bearing to the formation of the ANC is what we call the political press. Here we speak about the early newspapers that were formed. We had a series of newspapers, and some of these newspapers were agitating for a revolution, for a change. I spoke about the Methodist Church, and I was not looking to my left all along. Last line there, and I apologize after the self-presentation. And this is the deacon of the church, so I need to apologize. But all of us come from him. So then when political press were different newspapers that were actually agitating, black newspapers, but many of these newspapers were owned by whites or missionaries. And some of them, for instance, the first newspaper that was formed was called Ngxanga. It was formed around 1837, but then we had a series of other newspapers. That was formed immediately after this. For instance, after that, Ikwezi, Historia Ngxanga. And in this Historia Ngxanga, it's where Theo Soga, when he returned from Scotland, published a stanza of Liza Lisitina Lako. The stanza that says, Bona izolo lakho wethu, ukole izolo zakho, okay, it was basically what you were saying. When he returned through the Cape, what he saw was the cattle killing of around 1856, 1857. I'm sure you read about no the killing that happened during that period. So he was actually looking at what transpired. People were dying. Now you are saying to God, yeah, our people forgive their trespasses, and so that they should not basically perish. That's what you are saying. That stanza was actually put in Historia Ngxanga for the first time. We know that Theo Soga wrote that song, Liza Lisitina. But then after Historia Ngxanga, we had what was called Ngxanga. All these newspapers were owned by missionaries. And the one that was established around 1870 was called Isidri Samakosa. Isidri Samakosa. This one is newspaper where John Tengo Chabavu belonged to. He was the editor of this newspaper, but occasionally he would actually put in political stuff in there. And some of the people were not happy about that, and they reported him to the patron of the newspaper called Dr. Stewart, and he was fired. Remember, we said all these newspapers were mission-owned. So the first black-owned newspaper was formed around 1884, and it's called Ngxanga. This one was 100%, let me not say 100% owned, but it was owned by John Tengo Chabavu, but it was funded by whites. Because we know that John Tengo Chabavu was a liberal. He actually worked with white people, and the people who funded him was John X. Merriman, James Roustinus, he's the colleague of the James. He was the CJ, the Chief Justice, around 1940, a legal mind. But then the last one was Jacobo Sawa. Can you remember Jacobo Sawa? Jacobo Sawa, the building of the provincial chair is named after Jacobo Sawa, the premier's office. It's Jacobo Sawa. No, he knows. He knows, I'm telling you. And he wants against you on it. Jacobo Sawa. In fact, Jacobo Sawa also piloted the Native Land Act of 1930. The Native Land Act of 1930 was piloted through Parliament by Jacobo Sawa. Remember, it was started by Herzog. We are not there, it's a diversion as well. It was actually started by Herzog, but ultimately the person who piloted through was Jacobo Sawa. The minister that succeeded Herzog around 1900, late 1912, and then in June he piloted through. Yeah, the Tully House, 60% was Sawa. Yeah. Sawa was basically a liberal. So what they did, they funded Ngxanga. You later see there's a newspaper called Izwi Labantu. Izwi Labantu. It was established around 1897. This one was also black-owned, but it was funded by Cecil John Rhodes. It was funded by Cecil John Rhodes. The blacks then, in particular, there's a chap, the secretary of the South African Native Congress. South African Native Congress wrote, and the name is A.K. Soga, the son of Theo Soga, wrote to Rhodes and said that we don't subscribe to INVO because we had clashes in the Eastern Cape. And then he was funded by Rhodes, and he opened this newspaper. So we had different newspapers that agitated for change. They agitated to say that for revolution, because they could not take the stress of the land. They were unhappy about it, and then they implanted a revolution thinking among the natives of the then South Africa, and through newspapers. They liked writing. You'll see even, take the hymn book in church. Many of the hymns were written by them. We've stopped to write hymns now. Most of our hymns, it's actually the old people. They actually laugh. They laugh hymns. But then the fourth aspect that led directly to the formation of the ANC was political organizations that were established. Political organizations. With the first political organization in Bumba, Yama Africa, was established around 1882. 1882, where in Bumba, Yama Africa, that was established. Yama Africa. Or you can also call it in Bumba, Yamanya. Who can translate it to Afrikaans? In Bumba, in Manya.
Can I get that clip, please, to translate?
I'll do that, yes. In Bumba, in Manya. It's like Bruderbond. Bruderbond. That's the reason why when the Bruderbond is the closest, it's like Bruderbond. Around 1919, when they fought, they said that, but we got this name from us. Remember, Bruderbond, we had the Bruderbond prior to the beginning of the 20th century. But basically, Moribund, the time when they became strong was around 1918. 1918, you know, after the World War and the squash policy, when their farms were destroyed, they then decided now to establish their own. I'm afraid there's a veteran at the back, so he might understand. He's a doctor for that matter, so I must be careful. So, by the first African organization that was formed, first political organization of blacks was called Ngxanga, or Ngxanga Africa. But then, immediately after that, in Ngxanga, Yamanyama was formed in Port Elizabeth. It was formed in Port Elizabeth in the Eastern Cape. And it was formed by John Ngxanga. You must never forget that detail. It was formed by John Ngxanga. But then, immediately after that, we then had the establishment of what was called the Natal Indian Congress. The Natal Indian Congress. It was formed around 1894, and on the heels of Natal Indian Congress, APO was established, African People's Organization. This one was formed in 1902. You can see, long before the ANC was formed, already you had political organization. In Bumba, Yamanyama, and this too. This one, the Natal Indian Congress, and I'm sure you understand why they formed. Why was APO formed, and it was formed in the Western Cape. The reason why it was formed, Congress, you actually realize that. Remember earlier we spoke about the imposition of slaves into the hinterland or into the Cape, where these slaves that were imported. They were actually banned and they abolished around 1884. But the slaves that arrived in the Cape arrived in conditions that were not ideal to them. And also the Indians. Indians were basically brought in around 1860. Both of them, as soon as they arrived in a climate that's not conducive. They landed right in the working class. Their genesis in the South African political environment was strictly within the working class. Long before Africans could actually form part and parcel, basically, of the working class. And we know it was predominantly kind of the African political organization of Abdullah Abdurrahman. It was colors. They landed in a situation that disadvantaged them right, and that's the reason why they were the first people to form political organizations. You see, the African People's Organization under Abdul, and then you had the Natal Indian Congress. Indians did not came to South Africa as slaves. They came as indentured laborers, and they worked on the sugar plantation fields of Natal. You can see long before the ANC was formed, already the political organization among Indians and also among the counts. Indentured is like contract workers. You are contract and slaves. You understand slavery in its classical sense. I told you earlier that slave is like you are chattel property. Somebody can own you like he owns his shoes. So that's the difference between But then immediately after this, it's when the native congresses were now established. With the first one that was established around 1900 July by Martin Lutu. Martin Lutu is the uncle of Albert Lutu. You can see it runs in the blood, this being fighting against injustice. It runs in the blood, Martin. Not necessarily in English we say uncle, but in Xhosa we will say Utato.
And Mangosuthu is in that bloodline as well.
Yes, Mangosuthu is also in that bloodline. But then Martin Lutu, Utato Mwenga, Albert. So this organization was then formed around 1900. Yeah, but then, remember when we started, Shalo said there's contestation.
Yes, it takes with the cousin.
There's contestation around when was the ANC actually formed. Shalo says 1800, somebody said the 1800, 1908, others 1912, but others go back to 1891. And the reason why they go back to 1891, around 1887, the native voter registration act was passed. The registration act was passed. In Xhosa, they also call that act Tungulong, basically in the Eastern Cape. Remember, property blacks or civilized blacks in the Eastern Cape could vote. So when this act was passed, it basically, Tungulong means to sue your mouth. So when that act was passed, its intention was to de-enfranchise those, the blacks who were civilized in the Eastern Cape. So an organization was formed called the South African Native Congress. That's the reason why people now confuse South African Native Congress with the ANC. It's two different things. ANC was formed in 1912, not in 1908, not even in 1891. South African Native Congress. It was formed around 1891. Its founder is Thomas Ngxanga. It's Thomas Ngxanga. Thomas Ngxanga. And he remained at the helm for. He remained at the helm almost for 21 years. But then he was the president. But then we had somebody called Jonathan Tumiso. This one after the Kimber. He was the secretary also for those number of years. But then from 1891, this organization became basically more as soon as it was formed. That's the reason when they speak about the South African Native Congress, they speak about Walter Hubusani basically as the president. Walter Hubusani. You know Walter Hubusani? You have heard about Walter Hubusani? Is the Yes, but also is the second person who translated the Xhosa Bible into Xhosa after Diosoka. Diosoka was the first person, then Walter Hubusani was the second person. Then he became the president around 1902. You can see first we had Natal Native Congress, then we had the South African Native Congress. Although we say South Africa, it was not necessarily an organization, it was regionally based. Because blacks were responding to what was happening in their region. So this organization was regionally based there in the Eastern Cape, especially in East London. We spoke earlier about Imbumba, Yama Africa. Imbumba was in Port Elizabeth. Then we had this one, Hubusani, in East London. It's very important to understand this, because you'd see the reason why the ANC was formed. It's because of the infights between Jabavu, of Imbumba Yama Africa and Hubusan of the South African Native Congress. The other name of South African Native Congress in the Eastern Cape was called Ngxanga. The Eastern Cape. And then you had Native Congress also in the Transvaal. It was called the Native United Political Associations of the Transvaal of the Chief. It was called Native United. And then the last Native Congress was in the Orange River. Orange River, the last of Free State. The Orange River Native Congress. Native Congress. The president there was John Mosha. And Thomas Mapitela. Can you still remember Thomas? Thomas Mapitela. You'll see in the photo the delegation that went to London. You'll see Thomas Mapitela there. But Thomas Mapitela is the longest serving chairperson of the ANC, national. Then the chairperson was called the Speaker. He was called the Speaker. And Thomas Mapitela was elected for years. Nobody, even Gwede Mantashe, doesn't come close to the years that Thomas Mapitela served in that role. So we then added this. Now you can see you have Native Congresses in Natal, in the Eastern Cape, in Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. Can somebody explain why these Native Congresses all over the place? Establishment mushrooming one after the other. One after the other. There was a reason for that. A situation has developed complex where natives now realize that there's no prospects in claiming this birthright of freedom with spear in hand. Because they were defeated on the battle line due to superior military hardware of whites. With the last battle that was fought in 1906. And you know, I don't want the secretary to. The secretary is opposed to me. You know this battle? How do we call this battle? Comrades, this one, 1906. It's the last battle. It marks 300 or 3 centuries of resistance against colonial incursion. Bambata. It's the Bambata. Bambata. It's the Bambata. Yet, Bambata, the surname is Ngxanga, was killed because of the act that we spoke about earlier, the Grand Great Act, where taxes were now imposed on Africans. They resisted the spoil tax, and as a result, when these colonial officials, 2 of them, went there to go and collect, Bambata killed them. And then the British was on his case, ran away, and he was killed in Ngxanga, in the forest then in Ngxanga in 1906. When we speak...
You have to chase his house.
One, I just remember when you were secretary. Yeah, he was very old. You said that at one point you went there, visited Chase during December or what, and he showed you there, there's where the...
Next to his house.
Is it?
Yes.
Yeah, in the fields there.
You were there with the general, just here, the memorial is just next to his house.
Bambata Ngxanga was then killed. And you know what they did? They even beheaded him. He was decapitated. And they took the head and go and show the subject that yes, your king. The king was killed. Remember it also happened with Ngxanga? But I think also with the chief, the king here, is the Khalishiwe Wong. But the king was also killed and beheaded. Can't remember. But then he was beheaded. This one, when we speak, he was killed. When we speak in terms of ANC language, it's important to remember this connection. Because now, you'll see it marks the end of us fighting colonial powers with spear in hand. The next time that we that we decided to resuscitate resistance through arms was in 1961 when Ngxanga was formed. It's almost 50 years, more than 50 years after the Bambata rebellion took place. But also what led to the formation of this native congresses, one after the other one, was, I don't know, is it almost an hour?
It's more than that.
Should I stop here?
No, take us to 1912.
Okay. I don't have a choice. If I'm instructed, what can I do? But then,
almost an hour and a half.
Is it? I was galloping. And now, you must attend the official speech. You must attend that you have not seen anything yet. So the other reason for the native congresses to be established one after the other was the growing size of the African intelligentsia. There's a book that I bought it, I think, for Comrade Maruki, although he vehemently denied it earlier. Under duress, he said to me when we were attending the national conference, "You buy this book for me." And now I'm a senior in politics, but he's my senior in terms of age. I didn't have a choice but to buy it for the deputies. But he was instructing me now, as a bookkeeper, you must buy it for me. So I bought the book for the deputy. It's called Francis Mary. It explains. Okay. Someone says here that Norman, but Maruping looks younger than me. It's just that, most of the time, I wasted my time with whiskey and brandy. That's the reason why I look old. So then the reason Francis Mary says for the formation, one after the other, of these native congresses, it's because of the growing size of the African intelligentsia. Those who got learned in mission stations, and those who left the country to go overseas. He says that in the year 1906 to 07, 150 Africans went overseas. To go and study there. What John Ngxanga, Dube, Big Speaker, Charlotte Makaike. And they got exposed there to different political schools of political thought. And they got exposed to different governments as well. These were the people who detected the moment and had the courage to act, who formed the ANC. It comes from here, these people here. But what triggered the formation of the ANC was the formation of the union. Formation of the union. The Union of South Africa in 1910. It was formed in 1910, but we know what transpired. Here, the English were now handing over government of South Africa to the Afrikaners. But we know what transpired before this. When these diamonds and gold was discovered, these diamonds and gold were discovered in areas that were not under British rule. The diamonds got discovered in the Free State and also in the Transvaal. British monopoly companies could not access these minerals. And then they decided that there's no way that we will sit back and not access these minerals. We need to go to war. That's the reason, comrades, why Kimberley. Ordinarily, Kimberley is supposed to be the Free State. It was not even under the Cape. Kimberley, I think, was declared around as a city around 1878. Around 1878, it was declared a city.
He is the former mayor of Kimberley, Chief.
Kimberley was declared
the city of first.
Around 1878, it was declared a city. Around 1880, it was taken by Britain. and put under governments of the Cape around 1880. So it's important to understand this development. That Kimberley was put under the Cape around 1880. And with Free State, because with diamonds mines and gold mines, they had to go to war to access these diamonds. And I'm sure you've heard about the Anglo-Boer War of 1899 to 1902. And it ended with the signing of the Treaty of Vereeniging in 1902. Where power now was transferred from the Afrikaners to the English. And Sir John Rose then got access to the mines. You know, the De Beers, that was later changed to Anglo-American. So it ended there, but then Britain, who colonized these two Boer republics, know that you can't keep them, the whites, especially the four generals who were conquered, under their direct heel forever. They then decided in 1910, through the Union, to hand back power. You will see other people confuse the formation of the ANC, because in 1908, we had 33 whites who were now assigned by Britain to say that you must decide on the future of South Africa. The 33 whites, and 12 of them were from Transvaal, TBM, and 8 of them were from the Cape, and 5 were from Natal. The other 5 was from the Orange River Colony, and the 3 were from Rhodesia. The remaining 3 was from Zimbabwe. So these 3 whites decided on a couple of things. One of the things that they needed to decide on was what kind of a union will South Africa be? Will it be federal or will it be a unitary state? John Smuts agitated strongly for a unitary state. That's the way Parliament is supreme and make laws over all. Even now, you can see, in as much that we have provincial councils, Parliament is supreme, and its laws override those of provinces. So they then decided that it would be unitary. Also, what they decided was on the language policy. Yeah. They then agreed Dutch and English. Dutch and English should be the official languages. Remember earlier we spoke about civilized blacks. The question of blacks. Yes, in the Eastern Cape, who could vote there at the franchise. So we had contestations in these forums where this the 3 whites, because others were saying that now let's deny them altogether of franchise rights. But then the final settlement was that let the Eastern Cape Africans keep the franchise, but in the other 3 colonies, Africans would not be allowed to vote. Africans would not be allowed to vote. So it's a franchise issue. Yes, yes, true. And then the last one was the establishment of capitals. How will we handle the issue of capitals? Major contestations among them. They then decided that let the administrative capital of South Africa, let it be transferred. It's where the union buildings are. You'll find the union buildings there. Because of the consensus that was reached in 1908, 1909. But then they agreed that the judicial capital of South Africa should be the Free State. It's where the Supreme Court of Appeal is. They then decided that the legislative capital of South Africa should be Cape Town. It's where Parliament is. But then Natal was unable to say that every colony got, except us. And then they were given the head of the railways. You remember the railway matters. So, blacks now, who participated in the Anglo-Boer War, were not happy. They called their own convention around the 24th to the 26th of March, here in Bloemfontein, where the ANC was formed. Under the leadership also of the Rhine River Native Congress, Thomas Mapikela and John Moshe. They could not get the church where the ANC was formed. So the South African Native Convention was then formed in 1909 in a classroom there, because the church was not available. SANG was then formed. And they were saying, let's petition the South African Parliament. If that fails, we'll go to Britain. And we'll explain to them that we fought on the side of the Queen to subjugate the Afrikaners. How can you now fight a peace that excludes Africans? You'll see there's a picture also, besides the one where Dube is. You'll see there's a picture where there's in between, you'll also see a white person there. It's Schreiner as the name. Schreiner was appointed to say that accompany them to Britain and assist them with.
I thought that name was Colonel.
But then the leadership that was selected here, the ANC was not supposed to be an organization committee. The leadership that was selected here, the president was Hubusa. The deputy president was Dube. The secretary was A.K. Soka, the son of Pio Soka. And then the deputy secretary was Jeremiah Mako. Jeremiah Mako. And then the treasurer was Jewel Khoronya. The treasurer was Jewel Khoronya. This one was supposed to be a permanent organization. But the delegation that went overseas, we had a fight between these two. Kubusan and the secretary. That's the reason Congress, in everything that we do, never allow a fight between the chairperson and the secretary.
How are you listening to?
And, you rather withdraw, but you don't go to the fight. This is what destroyed this organization. And because now, everyone, when they were supposed to raise their own money. Kubusan could raise the money. A.K. Soka became angry because he couldn't raise the money and they couldn't accompany the delegation. And as a result, he started to put up a fight with the chairperson. And it had a detrimental impact on this organization. You'll see when they returned around 1910, Pixley also ended up in the fold, came back from. They met this delegation. On the 2nd of October, he came back and he started to play a role in this organization. In SANG, South African Native Convention. Started to play a role. But remember earlier I spoke about the fights between Hubusan and who's the other person? Let me just check with you. Chabavu in the Eastern Cape. They had fights there. And as much as the Eastern Cape was leading the revolution, they had fights. And Pixley, when he arrived, wanted to participate, but he realized this fighting will create problems. That's the reason why he then decided to form a new organization altogether, away from the South. That's how the ANC was established. You'll see on the 13th of November 1911, he called for a meeting of SANG to meet by the end of that year. They could not meet. It was then decided that they must meet on the 8th of January. The 8th of January was on a Monday. Those who described the time, they said that it was an overcast day. It was overcast on that particular day. Chabavu was invited, and also Hubusa, the two giants of the Eastern Cape. One heading in Ngxanga, the South African Native Congress, and the other one heading in Boom, Yamanya, in the Eastern Cape. Both were invited. The meeting was opened by John Washer. The meeting was opened by John Washer on that particular day. Edward Seu opened, as soon as they were welcome, with somebody called Edward Seu. Who did the scripture reading, and opened the meeting before prayer. Edward Seu. As soon as he was done, the constitution of the ANC was then introduced. It was explained there by George Monsi, a lawyer who studied overseas as well. Explained the constitution of the ANC. But due to the fact that they could not agree on membership fees that branches must pay, the constitution could not be agreed. They decided to defer the constitution to some other day and they assigned the three lawyers, Pixley Zayaka Semen Monsiwa and Alfred Mangena, to work on the constitution. Then as soon as the constitution was out of the way, Pixley Asende then stood up and proposed the formation of the ANC. And he started by saying that the demon of racialism, the aberration between the Xhosa and the Fingu. It's very much important that you need to understand the context. Xhosa and Fingu. The Xhosa was Hubusai. Remember we said that they had that fight? So when he said that the aberration between the Xhosa and the Fingu, he was referring to the fight between Hubusana and Chabavu. Chabavu was a Fingu. Chabavu collaborated with the whites to a large extent. So this it started there. It worked, they worked, Chabavu worked with the Fingus and the other tribes, the Ndambe and the Kuka, were now those who were subjugated by the whites. So he was, when he said that this operation between Xhosa and Fingu was referring to that battle. Then he said the animosity between the Zulu and the Tonga. He was referring to himself. He was not, he's not Zulu, he's a Tonga. Born in Inani, the mother is Zulu, but the father is Tonga. So he's referring to that fight between the Tonga and the Zulu.
So he's going to Tonga Zulu.
He's actually referring to that, and between the Basotho and all other races. Now my deputy will excuse me. I can't squeeze in so I want to, I'm trying He says, that battle, he says, nothing has shed enough blood among themselves. It must be buried and forgotten. We are one people. And then he said, because I'm Zulu, so I'm Ngxanga. And immediately after that, with another lawyer who was trained overseas, called Alfred Mangena. This we proposed the formation, made the proposal. And then Alfred Mangena seconded the proposal. He seconded the proposal. As soon as that proposal was seconded, we then have the entire 68 delegates, because 68 delegates attended, stood up and they sang Lisa Dingalako. Immediately afterwards, they sang Lisa Dingalako. But then, papers were now presented. Where papers that were presented, where a paper that was presented on native marriages. And divorce.
In that meeting?
Yes, in that meeting. That it was native marriages and divorce. Then the seventh paper that was presented. The second one, you can see divorce comes from. It was part and parcel of the founding of the ANC. You have a right to marriage, but you also have a right to divorce. Then the second one that was discussed is native schools and churches. The third aspect that was discussed was native beer. Is it a national beverage? Ngxanga. Ngxanga was also discussed. Yes, how it was put is that native beer, is it a national beer? It was discussed there.
The traditional, yes.
Then the first item that was discussed, it was discussed there. So you can bring to ANC gatherings, no sin at all. It was discussed right in the inaugural conference of the ANC. Why should it be a sin? And I'm sure
I will bring some from
They subjected us to torture recently. Recently, the church that we attended, what does it mean? The Easter Sunday, they subjected us to torture. They gave us, was it nothing? Oh, the problems. I think it's sweet wine. Yeah. I felt warm then, I stung then. I was busy in church because of that. Comrade Matika was in Brixton. I was in Kakamas. In church there, but I was up and running there after. And everyone was saying to me, hallelujah, we must make you a deacon of the church. Then the following aspect that was discussed was the white and black hair. We are almost done. And black hair. After this conference, the meeting actually drew to an end. But then we had John Knox spoke. We had someone called John Knox spoke. Who have heard about it? Who have heard about John Knox spoke? John Knox Boko is the grandfather of Comrade Naledi Pandor. He wrote a song, and that ANC meeting was concluded with that song. And if we know it, we can sing it. That's now in conclusion. It's the plea of Africa. I know Fosi knows it. Can you start so that others can sing? Charlotte, with your permission. Plea of Africa. I don't know the names.
Was when you are lost.
Others call it God bless Africa. So as soon as that was done, the meeting was over. That's how the ANC was formed. I jumped many aspects because of time constraints. Thank you very much.